Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's bonus episode of the Beef Edge podcast is a recording of the Beef Pulse Forum at BEEF2026 on market and policy outlook, hosted by Teagasc advisor Sean Doorley, as he interviews Joe Burke from Burke, Kevin Hanrahan, Teagasc Head of Rural Economy, and the Director of Teagasc, Frank O'Mara.
We'll start off with you, Frank, and I suppose beef farmers here today know Teagasc have a large remit across research, advisory and education. What would you point out as the standout areas where Teagasc is making a real difference for beef farmers and for the beef industry?
Thanks, Sean. And look, before we get into the question, maybe just like to say, delighted to see so many people here, and everybody has been very welcome. And I suppose we're coming towards the end of the day now, but I think it has been a great day, and there's been, a great crowd here, and the level of engagement among farmers with people on the stands has been great. So all in all, I think that, we're very delighted with how things have gone. So look, the beef sector is obviously hugely important, and the biggest number of farmers in the country are involved in beef. It's across every region of the country. It makes a contribution to the local economy, and obviously a big contribution nationally to our exports and so on. So it's a very important sector, and we're very committed to supporting beef farmers. We've obviously a lot of research going on here, and people will have seen that as they walk through the various stands today and the various demonstrations. And but then we have a very big advisory programme supporting beef farmers as well, and that's, I suppose, the main way that individual farmers would come across that is the one-to-one support they get from their advisor. Maybe they're in a discussion group with us, maybe they come to a local event, and that. So our advisory service would be our touch point with most of our farmer clients. But then we run a few very significant programmes at a national level. We have the Future Beef programme for suckling, and people will have seen some of the information on that out on the suckler village, and maybe met some of the farmers involved and so on. For dairy beef, we have the Dairy Beef 500 programme, and again that's a national programme where again I think we've over 20 farms in that, where we look at the performance that farmers can achieve on their own farms. We have two demonstration farms that we operate in collaboration with Dawn Meats. That's the Newford farm in Roscommon, a suckler farm, and the Tipperary farm in Ballyvadden in Tipperary on dairy beef. And we actually have an open day on that on the 22nd of July, and hopefully some people here might be able to get to that as well. So look, we have an awful lot of programmes and I suppose advice and research going on to support the beef sector, and I'd hope that farmers would be aware of that, and that have that interaction with their local advisor, or come here and learn a bit here, and that they can see the important things maybe that make a difference to profitability, and try to see how they might incorporate those into their own farms. So that's, I suppose, the key thing, Sean, that we'd be trying to get across to farmers and support farmers with.
Okay, just another thing I'll ask you there, Frank, is that one of the key themes is about, I suppose, encouraging the next generation to get involved in beef farming. So how can Teagasc support farm families in making beef farming more attractive, more viable and more easier to pass on to the next generation?
So look, generation renewal, as it's called, it's a big topic. Everyone is talking about it. The commissioner is talking about it, and so on. And in the end of the day, there's a couple of things that I think are really important if we're going to have the next generation of beef farmers. Number one is farms must be viable and profitable. There has to be money in it, and we've seen out there on the stands today, and people will know this. They don't need us to tell us that the last year has been very good for beef farming. We last year, and Kevin may talk about this, recorded highest incomes ever, and so that profitability of the system is really important. If you've got that, it's very, very hard to sell to someone to take on something just for the love of it. So the money has to be there, and it has to be attractive. And look, we have to recognise that an awful lot of our beef farms now are part-time. That's because often farms aren't big enough in scale to support a full-time income. But if you're if we're going to be relying on a lot of part-time farmers for the future, there still has to be money in it for them. Again, they're not just doing it because, oh, this is lovely and Mammy and Daddy did it, I'd love to do it. There has to be the money in it. But if you're all going to be part-time farming, it also has to be streamlined, and you have to be able to manage the work on the farm when you come home from your day job or at the weekends in a way that doesn't impact too much on your I suppose your family time or the time that you might want to spend pursuing hobbies or other leisure things. So having money in it, having it relatively easy to do, they're the two, I think, secret ingredients. They're not very secret, but they're the two main ingredients to generation renewal. And I suppose a lot of what Teagasc does is about trying to have profitable systems, have easy to manage systems. And then I suppose for people that are in that phase of maybe looking to see who might take on the farm, or if you're a young person wondering, will I get stuck in this? Our advisors again are there to help in terms of that process and advise as to what needs to be done and who you might need to talk to and what are the things you'd want to consider if you are going down through that farm succession process and handing over or maybe going into a partnership or whatever. And I suppose so they're the main ways, Sean, I suppose, that Teagasc would work to assist people in this process that we call generational renewal.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank. Okay, we'll move on to you, Joe. And I suppose Frank touched on, the record prices that we had in the last year or year and a half or so. But Joe, can you kind of give us a little bit of we call it history lesson maybe in the last year and a half? What's driven the price increases since 2024? The price increases and price decreases and maybe customer buying patterns or so.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So in 2025, from 2024, cattle prices here in Ireland rose by nearly 40%. So more than an extra €2 a kilo, went into the cattle on average over the course of the year. And that was very much driven by demand for our beef from our export markets, from Europe and from the UK. That production of beef around Europe declined by nearly 5% in 2025. Much of that was driven by actually the impact of diseases. So blue tongue in the previous couple of years had resulted in a lot of either cows not going in calf, maybe embryo mortality, maybe poor calf survival, factors like that. And there are still a lot of disease issues, animal disease issues at play around Europe. But as the director touched on as well, generational renewal and succession and environmental regulation and all of these different factors are chipping away in different markets in terms of their ability to maintain their beef production and maintain their farming base as well, in places like Sweden, Germany, France, all of those countries. They're seeing significant declines in their beef herd. And as a result of that, their beef production has dropped. So really, those factors, the fact that they needed to import more beef, that their own domestic kind of local production was down, that was one of the big factors that led to the increase in demand for Irish beef in those key export markets. So while those price increases were obviously welcome and needed at farm level in order to, give incomes that bit of a boost and that positivity, obviously, we have seen prices come back down. So, at the start of the year, their prices were at around $7.20 a kilo, excluding VAT. And last week, the week before last, they were at $6.35. So a decline of 85 cents. Very significant. This is one of, unfortunately, the knock-on kind of negative impacts of high prices is volatility. And in a normal year, maybe prices might drop by 10%, but that was only, 40 cents. But 10% of, €7 or €8 is obviously much more significant, and the impact that can have when you have a trading system that we have in Ireland, and on average the cattle change hands twice over their lifetime. And where you have farmers getting in at a time of high prices and high factory prices, they're at the mercy of the market, unfortunately, and that volatility has had a major impact. And it's one of the main things, obviously, that we're talking to farmers about here today is around, well, what's the outlook? Is there a bit of a recovery? Likely. and what is the demand? Because as we've heard in the last few weeks, especially the UK, which is very much part of our kind of key export focus in terms of Irish beef, almost half of our beef exports over recent years, over many, many years, have gone to the UK. But so far this year, we've seen a 10% decline in the volume of our exports to the UK, driven by a much more aggressive focus on the part of some of our competitors there, Australia and New Zealand especially, that as a result of the trade deals kind of post-Brexit that the UK has put in place with those countries, they now have access to be able to send in product without a tariff, and particularly in the wholesale market, supplying the likes of catering and hotels and restaurants. They're very, very price competitive. Okay, they don't have quality assurance. They're not, of that traditional provenance like ourselves to be able to supply the UK market. But, where you have those lower priced, kind of more, aggressive in terms of being able to buy a cheap product, their focus isn't necessarily as much on the quality. So, we have lost market share there, and that is one of the factors that has contributed towards the decline over the last few months.
Okay, and that you talked about the arrangements that the UK has maybe with Australia beef, and going forward, what's likely to happen with that? Like, what is it? Is it going to increase or decrease?
Yeah, look, there already has been a very significant increase, and that that has resulted in our market share declining significantly. There is an allowance within those trade deals that they would even be allowed to have even a further increase within their quota, if you like. So their quota will increase, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll send in more and more and more product. That over the course of the next 8 years, those quotas will increase even quite substantially further. But the thing is, so far, their exports are confined only to that wholesale market. And the retailers, so our key customers are the retailers and the kind of premium burger manufacturers or quick service restaurant chains, and they remain confined to British and Irish beef. Their sourcing policy is that they'll buy British and Irish beef either from Red Tractor quality assured farms or Bord Bia quality assured farms. So for as long as that stays the case, at least we are insulated to some extent anyway, that's the key market that we're going after, is the highest priced market. And that's the focus of Bord Bia really in terms of promotion and marketing, to make sure that we continue to be able to have that section of the market, if you like, more or less ring-fenced for British and Irish beef. Will still be exposed to the vagaries of the market in terms of the negotiation and the fact that there are cheaper alternative sources available. But at least when you have a customer like that is loyal, that demands high standards, that demands quality, that's obviously, along with having other markets. So, we also must acknowledge that the opportunity that's there in the UK, even though we continue to supply those market channels, it is likely we won't even, continue to be sending those same high traditional volumes of beef into the UK. We need to be focused more on continental European markets as well. Italy, Sweden, France, Netherlands, and so on. So it's really important that we'd continue to work with those customers there and market Irish beef as effectively as we can.
And just before I move on to Kevin, just quickly we're talking about marketing to UK, suckler beef from suckler farms versus beef from the dairy herd. Are they marketed differently? The short answer really, Sean, is not especially. So the beef from the suckler herd, really important, really good for our image, really good in terms of the reputation that we have built up for Irish beef over many decades. But now when beef goes into a boning hall and it's deboned and you're mostly exporting the beef in the form of vacuum packed cuts, historically the market for suckler beef tended to be you're exporting hindquarters, you're exporting in the form of pistola hindquarters, U-grade heifer sides, U-grade, young bull hindquarters. That's not really a feature of the trade anymore. It was at that time that the demand, particularly from the Italian market and one or two other markets, was for these animals of, superior conformation.
Of course, the cattle from the suckler herd and, U-grade cattle, they're going to have a higher meat yield. They're going to have a superior grading profile. So you're going to get a few percentage more of meat cuts, particularly of the higher priced cuts from your carcass in the boning hall. But in general, once you get animals, that are of a conformation of, O equals O plus, and of a suitable carcass weight, so, generally 280 to kind of 400 kilos carcass weight, generally the cuts from those animals are suitable for the vast majority of our retail customers and our kind of key premium food service buyers as well. So to answer your question, there isn't a clear differentiation between, your beef from the suckler herd. It doesn't necessarily go to different market outlets. Okay, it is very suitable and it is a premium product and it helps us to market all of the beef. But yeah, it's a fact that it's not sold separately into specific outlets and channels.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I'll move on to Kevin now. I suppose want to say is that if any of you have questions, we're going to have a few roving mics going around, so there's an opportunity there for you if you have questions to ask them to the panel. So Kevin, I suppose, can you outline maybe the importance of CAP to the Irish beef sector and to Irish beef farmers?
Thanks, Sean. CAP remains very important. So everybody who's a farmer here will know that their direct payments come mostly from the Common Agricultural Policy. So for the average cattle rearing farm or cattle other farm, depending on the year, and this last year was a particularly good year, the payments will account for 100% or close to 100% of their incomes. But when we have very good years in terms of market incomes because of high cattle prices, that percentage will go down. But they're also very important in terms of helping farmers deal with the volatility that's going to be increasingly characterise the market component of their farm income. But farmers know that they receive these payments, but they have to do work for them. So I think that it's not just money for being a farmer anymore, it's money for satisfying good environmental conditions. Increasingly will be a results-based payment system. But the CAP is continuously in the process of reform. It's always being changed. And there's no prospect really of it disappearing. If people are telling you that it's going to be gone, it's not. It's just going to be changed, and most likely changed somewhat modestly in terms of what it's asking farmers to do. The big challenge in the new CAP is that there's fewer resources for it. And if you listen to the news, you know why that is. But there's a political argument to be made within the European Union about whether or not the reduction that the Commission are proposing is one that we want to live with, or do we want as a society, as a European society, to continue to support farmers for food security purposes and to maintain the landscape and the environmental goods that come from Irish agriculture and European agriculture at the level that they're at currently. So it's still very important. And one thing that we need to remember as well, and it's Joe's commentary about the beef market in the UK, we need to be reminded that the CAP is also about protecting the European food market for European farmers. And the pressure we see in the UK market from beef coming in from Australia and New Zealand, and Joe saying, emphasising more the continental European markets, are because those are the markets that still have that protection that we have traditionally enjoyed as European farmers. And the CAP is a key component of that. So that European market is the market for Irish farmers, and it's the one that we increasingly need to emphasise. I mean, this is the story back when Brexit was the big bad wolf. The negative impacts of Brexit were mitigated somewhat, but we really need to think about that European market that's going to be protected by European policymakers, largely for European farmers and to protect European consumers. So I think that's of a piece with a CAP that is prioritising food production and food security.
Okay, so and post 2027, I suppose, with the new CAP, what are the likely changes or proposals likely to come in?
So the big change is that there's going to be fewer resources for agriculture potentially. The exact magnitude of that reduction we don't know. The Commission's proposals are that the total envelope or budget that would come to Ireland will be down about 20%. But the expectation is that when we try to get an agreement on the budget, that reduction won't be as large as that. Whether it'll be stable or not in real terms, it seems unlikely to be. But in terms of the schemes that farmers, the type of schemes that farmers have been responding to and availing of, those are likely to be continued. There's going to be what's called a digressive area-based income support, the BIS scheme in a kind of a repackaged form. There's going to be some redistribution amongst farmers. Unfortunately, for most farmers, that will mean under what used to be the Pillar 1 schemes, there will be fewer resources, less money per farm, and less money per hectare, unless, as a nation, we persuade the rest of Europe to maintain the budget for agriculture and maintain the budget that Ireland gets from that budget. So that seems unlikely. So I think it's going to be less money from the cap, but still a significant contribution to farming income, despite that.
Okay, so the schemes that are there at the moment, would say the likes of SCEP and that, they'd still be there, you expect, or something similar, a different form?
There's still every member state has to have agri-environmental schemes, has to have things like those schemes. Member states will have the freedom to tailor them to their circumstances. There's increased freedom, in fact, in what's been proposed for member states to couple payments, but this is kind of a zero-sum game. And we need to think as an industry, what do we want to support and why do we want to do it in a particular way? We're going to have a couple payment scheme of some sort. We want to say, well, what's the strategic purpose of that? What's it trying to support? And is it what it's trying to support worth not having that support for the farmer in general, for the general farmer who won't have that particular activity? So, but things like SCEP that deliver for farmers, deliver for the environment, will be the type of measure that will most likely still be supported in the CAP post-2027.
And the likes of supporting female farmers and young farmers, that'll all be continuing? It
will be continuing and have greater emphasis. So that's one of the things that's targeted in the CAP proposals, is that there should be increased resources going to smaller farmers, female farmers, and younger farmers. And then it's again, to some degree, up to member states to say, what's the allocation we want to make as a member state, and what are the things that we want to do? Not all of those things are mandatory, but some of them are. And the exact measures that are mandatory versus voluntary for a member state haven't yet been decided yet. But there will still be an emphasis on encouraging younger farmers to get into farming, and also encouraging women to be active farmers.
And it's often talked about a retirement scheme. Is anything mentioned on that? Or?
No, and as everybody knows, our own National Commission on Generation Renewal kind of grappled with these issues. So it doesn't seem like there's likely to be a retirement scheme as such, but there's, all of the member states are asked to think very hard about what it is that they can do at a member state level that could encourage generation renewal over and above what the CAP will provide in terms of extra incentives. So different member states have taken a different approach to how they structure their tax systems, their social welfare systems, their pension systems. And there's probably lessons we can all learn from one another in terms of what's working for some member states that have a much younger profile of farming than we have here in Ireland. And could what they're doing in countries like Austria actually work in Ireland? Or could it work over some horizon? So the government is going to start to think about how it implements the 31 recommendations of the Commission on Generation Renewal, and those type of issues will be the meat and bones of that sort of process.
Okay, Kevin. Okay, I'll just come back to you, Director, again. Just I suppose the beef sector has changed significantly over the last 5 years or so, with increased emphasis on sustainability, so emissions and, we say, reducing slaughter age, input costs, market. So, what do you believe are the main priorities for the industry in the next 5 years?
Well, look, the industry is always changing, but I guess nothing changes either. Things always nearly stay the same. And just listen to Kevin there, the Common Agricultural Policy, that's still hugely important. And I suppose for individual farmers, there's not maybe a whole lot they can do on that. Their representative organisations and the department are the ones that will influence that. So when you come to kind of what, on the ground and what's important for farmers, look, I think for me, one of the overriding messages of today that is the importance that doing things well on your farm has to the bottom line. Yes, the markets are hugely important in terms of the profitability and the price you get for your cattle. Yes, the Common Agricultural Policy and the payments you get are hugely important. But the difference between farmers that I suppose are operating at the better end of efficiency and productivity and versus those that are at the other end is huge. So getting those technologies adopted more at farm level. That's a big priority for us, and I suppose for individual farmers, that's maybe something that you'd love to see people focusing on, and especially now that there is reasonable profitability in beef farming. Doing things well makes more of a difference than when there wasn't much profit in it. So trying, I suppose, to getting the key technologies, starting with the animal and breeding and using our indices, our suckler index, our terminal index, using the CBV and trying to improve the genetic gain in our herd. Essentially, Ireland then, the one big competitive advantage we have is we grow grass fairly well most of the year in most parts of the country. It's a very cheap source of feed, so making sure that we maximise that, it's an old message, but it's still really, really important and very important. I think a lot of opportunity on beef farms to improve grassland management, to bring in, I suppose, the new technologies. They're not new, but we're emphasising them again, like clover, which saves money and is good for the environment, to incorporate those into systems where they suit. That's really important. And the last one is the animal health, I suppose. Animal health is so important from the calf stage onwards. Before the cow calves, be thinking about animal health, because it stays with the animal right through their life if they're well reared, and keeping animal health right throughout the life. And we know we've new pressures coming on us with things like blue tongue and so on. So maintaining good biosecurity, all of that. They're old messages, Sean, but they're still really, really important. And so I think productivity and efficiency is really important. The environment is obviously still a major issue for us, and we had a lot of exhibits out there on climate change and water quality, and we've the nature restoration law being Ireland's plan for that being developed at the moment. They're all going to be big issues for the future as well. And I think in things like climate change or water quality in particular, we need every farmer really, to put their shoulder to the wheel if we're going to improve water quality in Ireland. And it's not just an issue for some farmers, this is an issue for all farms. I was in Denmark last week. They have no derogation in Denmark, but they still have very significant new laws coming in around farming to improve water quality. So they'd be the couple of key things I think that are really important. Obviously, generation renewal that we discussed a few minutes ago, and ensuring the industry is attractive to young people. Because without them we won't have an industry, or we'll only have a much smaller industry. So it's great actually to see the suckler herd has stabilised this year. We had been decreasing for a number of years, but the number of suckler cows calved so far this year is up about 3%. So that's I think reflecting the positivity that's out there about beef farming now. So look, that's an asset to the country, and I think we need to ensure we're getting the most out of that asset.
Okay. Joe, I'll just ask you there, something we maybe didn't touch on earlier, was the live trade. Can you give us a little bit of, I suppose, insight in how it's changed over the last number of years, and maybe also calf exports?
Yeah, no problem, Sean. So, this year, like a couple of the factors there, similar to the director touched on blue tongue, that we had our first few cases of blue tongue here in Ireland at the beginning of this year. And so that temporarily meant that we needed to renegotiate our veterinary protocols with our export markets. So that meant that it was a slow start to the year in terms of live exports this year, January and February. Well, January was mainly down to really rough sea conditions, and that meant that many of the ferries didn't carry trucks. And then in February, we had blue tongue, a few cases of blue tongue serotype 3 detected down in the southeast. And that, again, as I touched on, led to having to set out, if you like, these veterinary export agreements. But notwithstanding that really slow start to the year, overall our exports are only down by about 12%. And we're sitting at around 240,000, for almost the first 6 months of the year. And a couple of kind of standout ones, really, the Netherlands, Spain, Italy, steady performance in each of those markets. We're not really, seeing massive change. Poland was a market that had been beginning to develop over the last few years and seeing higher exports, particularly of calves and strong calves, reared calves going to Poland. So unfortunately, since Blue Tongue, we've had virtually no exports to Poland this year. So we've lost, basically about 25,000 of our exports that would have gone to Poland last year as a result of that. Yeah, exports to other markets have been going reasonably strong as well. So Northern Ireland is back a bit, but North Africa has been strong. And, quite a lot of cattle being bought there, young bulls being bought for export to Algeria. And, similarly then weanling exports to Italy, some to Spain, some to Greece. Those are important markets in terms of weanlings, and injecting a bit more competition and a bit more life into those weanling sales. And, again, contributing towards those higher prices that even though beef prices are back, mart prices have been thankfully positively influenced by this live export competition. Whether that be as a result of Northern Irish buyers or live exporters of weanling bulls into the Algerian or the Italian market. So looking forward, live exports, the outlook is maybe that they will remain, hopefully strong, but somewhat more volatile. That there are proposals at European level to move away from exporting young calves and to try and, raise the age at which calves would be exported. And also some European, proposed regulations, and fairly advanced in the proposal stage as well, hopefully ones that we will be able to have some influence on during the Irish presidency over the next few months. One would be around the stipulation that calves should be fed on board the truck during the journey. Now that obviously would get us around some of these minimum or rather maximum journey times and maximum feeding intervals between when animals, unweaned calves especially, can be fed during the export process. But the two things that it will certainly do, it will certainly increase cost significantly, and it will reduce down the number of animals that can travel on board a truck. So, there's a couple of fairly significant headwinds there. And another one would be the Dutch market. The Dutch market is our biggest calf market, has taken, nearly 100,000 calves already this year. But a lot of pressure there from animal welfare lobbyists and activists, which is resulting in, the industry itself had already committed to reducing, if not actually eliminating, imports of Irish calves even by this year. They pulled back on that because of a scarcity of calves in the European market, and thankfully continued to buy them this year, and they may continue to buy them next year. But we do feel that there's a real risk there that within the next couple of years that we will lose the Dutch market for our calves. Okay, not immediately something to totally, begin to panic about. There are other markets. I touched on the Spanish and on the Italian market, and some other markets, Eastern European markets, Croatia and so on. But definitely something to be mindful of in terms of, I suppose, looking forward. It's not always guaranteed that we're going to see those, very, very strong calf prices and very strong demand that we saw this spring.
Okay, Joe. I suppose, Kevin, question to you. I suppose a lot of farmers might be thinking, will there be a rollover on the current cap? Is that expected, I suppose, like the last time round? And maybe give farmers a bit of assurance that at least there won't be a break in payments or schemes or that. No,
there definitely won't be a break. And if there is a delay in terms of aligning up the law for post 2027 with the budgets, just like there was the last time, you'll have no break in terms of scheme payments. You'll have the new budget with the old law, so you'll be able to, the schemes will run on an extra year, and the money will be paid out. So there's no prospect of that happening at all. So I don't think anyone should need to be worried about that.
Okay. Look, now we'll open it up for any questions. There's going to be a couple of mics going around there, so put up your hand if you have any questions.
I'd just like to ask the question. Where do you see the beef industry going if a lot of supply is coming in from Australia, South America? We can't compete with their prices. So how viable will the beef industry be going forward?
Listen, I think the extra supply that's coming in from Australia and New Zealand into the UK market or into the European Union market from Mercosurs of this world, I think we just need to keep it in some perspective. It's additional to the market, but it still will be a single digit of the total market supply. The vast majority of the beef that European consumers will eat in the future will be beef produced in Europe. And the tariff protection that we have versus those beef products beyond the tariff rate quotas agreed under the Mercosur agreement will still be effectively prohibitive unless prices in the European Union are at very, very high levels. So I think we need to be concerned, obviously, that the alternative version of the world is where that beef just doesn't come in at all and there was no Mercosur agreement. Prices would certainly be higher, but the additional volumes of beef that are likely to come in from Mercosur, from Australia, New Zealand, are still going to leave the vast, vast majority of the beef that we eat, our European consumers eat, being supplied by farmers like the farmers in Ireland and the farmers in other member states. So it's a negative, but it's not the end of the future for European or Irish beef farmers.
Yeah, I think, Trevor, I'd subscribe to that view as well, that the additional volume that is indicated, and again, there is questions being asked even at European level in relation to the food safety aspect of Brazil in particular, and that may result in some further restriction even over the next few months. But even the Mercosur additional volume at 99,000 tonne, in overall the 6.5 million tonnes of beef consumed within the European Union. So I think that kind of context is really important. And if we look within the Irish model that we have here, we have to export 90% of our beef. And that, we need to continue to look to those higher value markets, to those best customers, rather than competing, hopefully not with those lower priced competitors, that we should be, at least the second best option within the market, be second to Italian beef in Italy, be second to German beef in Germany. That's where we need to be. They may not necessarily have us exactly on par with their own local domestic production, but we should be at least the importer of preference. And we are that in many of our markets. But just, really to lock down that last year, that scarcity of production left us in a really preferential position. And that's where we need to hopefully aspire to be. I suppose we would acknowledge that supply here in Ireland, it's not likely to recover really anytime soon in terms of, seeing any big increase, notwithstanding what we're seeing in terms of the volatility in live exports. But, rationalization, we've already seen some processors look to, either cut their capacity, stop boning out beef in certain factories. It's not unlikely, I suppose, that we'll see further rationalization even happening over the coming years.
The only thing I'd add is that the current world has changed from 10 years ago. So I don't expect the European Union will want to or be looking to cut its tariffs. It's like, so the world has changed. People are a lot more happy to retain the protection they already have, and in some instances add it. So food, and including beef, is increasingly seen as a strategic issue, and people are protecting their capacity to feed themselves and to supply themselves. And it's beef, it could be microchips, it could be other commodities. So I would expect that the European Union will want to retain a kind of an indigenous capacity to more or less feed most of its own needs. And the livestock strategy hasn't been published yet by the European Union, but it's expected to be published next week. And there's 5 words in that strategy, 5 key words, and the last one is excellence. And when asked to comment on what was the one word she'd sum up that strategy, the lady who's drafting it chose that word excellence. And for her, what that meant was that, just like Joe was saying, as European beef farmers, we need to differentiate our product and maintain that differentiation for our product versus product that will come into the European Union from outside. in limited volumes, but in some volumes. But we need to maintain that differentiation and maintain that excellence piece and the link in the European consumer's mind that Irish beef or German beef or French beef is the beef they want to choose. And if we can maintain that, I think we'll certainly have a very good future.
I won't add much to that. I think the lads have covered it well, but I just see there's been a big change in the way our beef and livestock industries are viewed over the last 10 years. 10 years ago, people were questioning, oh, look, can we afford to have livestock given all the emissions and all that? And we've moved on very much from that. And as Kevin said, at European level, which is all of Europe, not just the Commission publishing a livestock strategy. It's the first time we've had a livestock strategy for Europe, which is very positive. I think here in Ireland, our minister says, the priority for Ireland in the presidency is to promote our sustainable livestock systems. So I think, there's a lot of recognition there now as to the value of livestock industries and their importance both for feeding us in Europe, but also as a contribution to food security around the world. And also, to making a sustainable food system. We can't just have, you need animals because of their ability to recycle stuff. You need animals in a food system. So I think that realisation is there now, and I think that's a positive for livestock industries, including beef.
Look, I just suppose it's nearly time to wrap up, lads. So I just maybe ask you to give me maybe any conclusions you have, or after being here on the day and seeing what's on offer, and that just as your closing remarks. So,
listen, I really enjoyed the day. I thought the first few boards were excellent in terms of emphasising both that animals are at the heart of beef systems, and sometimes we forget that, but also the importance of high levels of technical performance in terms of moving you potentially from a bottom third of farms up towards that top third in terms of income performance. And it was, as an economist, you'd expect me to say it was great to see euros on almost all of the boards in terms of emphasising that things that you can do on your farm can change the economic performance that your farm is delivering and make a better living from the farm. So I really enjoyed the day. Thanks, kudos to Paul and all the team here in Grange for a great day.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Like that, big thing that I would take away would be the positivity that, great, despite prices having, weakened a good bit since the beginning of the year, we're still in a much different chapter than we would have been here 2 years ago. People are looking at, what can I do to, bring home to hopefully make myself a bit more efficient, a bit more financially sustainable, as well as in other ways. So that was really interesting. I think in the short term, there is an opportunity, and it's likely that the supply and the demand factors are such that we're likely to see prices strengthen over the next few weeks. So it's always good to be, here against that backdrop as well. And talking to a good few people also on the stand up here, along with the ACBI, the Association of Craft Butchers of Ireland, who are talking a little bit about, actually what is it like to sell our product to the end shopper, to the end consumer? What kind of trends are we seeing? Are they buying, different products? What has the trend been in terms of some slight downward pressure in terms of the higher priced items as well? So really interesting to get, we tasted some beef that was coming from dry aged versus that coming from wet aged or vacuum packed beef, which again, really interesting that the producers of the beef would actually taste it and see the difference between different processing methods like that.
So, Sean, just look, I won't add too much to the lads, but look, as Director Teagasc, I'd be really proud of what we put on here today, the event, and I want to say a big thanks to all my staff here in Grange and from around the country who've come here and participated on stands here today. And look, there's a great buzz around the place, and I think that's, the beef industry is in a much better place than it has been for many years. You feel that positivity out there. I think there is definitely a future in beef production. I think from our perspective in Teagasc, technology and efficiency and doing things right and makes a huge difference. And that's, I suppose, the message I'd like people maybe to take away from today is, the difference that all the various technologies, whether it's breeding or grassland management or animal health or whatever it is, the difference that they can make to the bottom line on your system, and generally also improve the sustainability, the environmental sustainability at the same time. So for people that might have seen something today and said, yeah, that's interesting, but I don't think I'd be able to manage that or whatever, don't be afraid to pick up the phone to your Teagasc advisor when you go home and say, look, I saw something interesting at Grange, maybe thinking about doing a little bit of that, how should I go about it? That's what we're here for. And we want to see the performance of the industry, the performance of farmers improving. So we're certainly very, very anxious and willing to help. And look, thanks also to the partner organisations that have been here with us today, Borbia, ICBF, Animal Health Ireland, and many, many others from the industry. I think you've helped to make the day a great success. And finally, just to mention maybe our sponsors, FBD, they've been sponsors of this event and other events for many, many years, and they really help us to put on as big an event as we were able to put on today. So I hope everybody got something out of the day. I hope everybody has enjoyed meeting people, and wish everybody a safe journey home. And not to forget, I suppose, the health and safety. As the Minister said earlier, farming is the most dangerous profession to be engaged in. We do have too high a number of accidents, unfortunately. So again, be very, very conscious of that on your own farms. And we look forward to seeing you at other Teagasc events in the coming months. So Gorbila Mahagwib Galer.
Okay, thanks very much to all the panel. So this concludes, this was the final of their 3 Beef Pulse discussions here today. So thanks again to Kevin, Joe and to Frank for your contribution here today. So look, thanks everybody for your patience, for hanging on, and I hope, as the lads were saying, found something positive and gained knowledge from today, and best of luck to you all in your farm going forward.
That's all for this bonus episode. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.